and welcome to episode 22 of the Dose of Wonder podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin McCall. What if I told you that we're not here today to just relive all the doom and gloom of the pandemic? Instead, we're going to look at the silver linings to those years that we would all rather forget. And we'll basically look at lots of the surprising positives that came out of those crazy years. So we can all probably agree that 2020 to around 2023 has not been anyone's best years, not by a long shot. I just want to acknowledge the global impact that those years have had. Like, it didn't matter who you were, where you were living, everyone kind of felt the effects in some way. But did you ever stop and think about any of the positives? Finding the good in those years? It might seem counterintuitive, but even with all the hardships that was happening, positive changes can happen. And it's just fascinating how a shift in perspective can reveal all those silver linings. So we could say that the pandemic years, as I'll call them, are probably some of the worst years that most of us have experienced in our lifetimes, with COVID-19 making what used to be simple things we didn't give a second thought to, like going grocery shopping, meeting a childhood friend for coffee, akin to something that you'd have to put on armor for, or mask up, and use weapons like sanitizer for. Just for those simple everyday things that you wouldn't have worried about in a million years, made it seem like you were heading into battle to face an invisible enemy, the coronavirus. And that's not to say anything about the out-of-control fires on various continents, insane elections, giant murder hornets, stock market crashes, socio-political and race riots. And looming large over all of this unrest is, of course, the worldwide coronavirus pandemic and all it had brought with it, like lockdowns, quarantines, anti-maskers, toilet paper hoarding, cabin fever, and Zoom fatigue, to name a few. One thing that I feel slightly comforted by, something that we can all kind of bond over, is the fact that there isn't a single one of us who hasn't been affected by it in some way. We are all in this together. I heard somewhere that this whole experience is like we're all stuck on the ocean in a bad storm, but we're not in the same boat. Some of us are on rafts, others on tiny dinghies, and yet other people are on yachts. We are all in this together, but some of us are at more of an advantage than others, and some less. What jumps out at you about that? I think that image is really powerful, just showing how everyone had the same human experience. We might have been in different boats dealing with different things, but we were all in the same storm. And it speaks to the importance of empathy and understanding. And it makes you think about how those different boats, those circumstances, might have shaped the silver linings that people found. Which is something that we can all do, no matter how we're weathering this storm. We can look for the positives, the silver linings. I know it might seem crass to look for the good when there has been so much tragedy, but as the iconic Mr. Rogers famously said, to look for the helpers in times of trouble. For the sake of our mental health and sanity, we need to look for the silver linings. Some silver linings I've realized, since the world got twist-turned upside down, as the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air said, that in one way feels like just yesterday, but at the same time feels like a lifetime ago, are home is what you make it. I know the social butterflies and extroverts and the people have probably struggled with the various sheltering in place and quarantines and lockdowns and working from home that came and went over the years. Whatever you want to call it, most of us have probably spent more time in our homes than ever before, except maybe the introverts like me. Then it might have just been par for the course. But those lockdowns and remote work really forced us to look at our homes in a different way. We were spending so much time there. You might have felt like you were getting cabin fever, and that you'd look more like a caveman than modern man with your quarantine hair. But home should be a sanctuary. Something that makes you feel at home. It should be a place we find comfort in, not a jail cell. Some silver linings for me was my home had never been cleaner, though I didn't go as far as disinfecting my groceries. And during the early days of the pandemic, I used the increased time at home to do some spring cleaning, getting rid of clothes and donating them to local thrift stores. A win-win. And maybe best of all, wearing your comfy pants and maybe even slippers on work Zoom meetings. A lot of people really shifted their thinking and their perception of home. It was more than just a place to sleep and eat. It became a sanctuary, a haven from everything going on outside. Something that I think is really important is our need for control and stability. When everything felt uncertain, our homes kind of provided that sense of security. It's like a place where we could make our own little world, our own routine in the middle of all the upheaval. Even having the quarantine hair I just mentioned, or ditching the work clothes, wearing comfy pants for all those Zoom meetings. There was a freedom in that. It was like we were allowed to just be ourselves and let go of all those expectations. And for some people, it was a chance to rediscover the simple things about being at home, like cooking, gardening, spending time with family. Did you experience any of that? I definitely tried more new recipes, especially baking, though I didn't venture as far as making the viral sourdough bread that everyone seemed to be making. The next silver lining I want to talk about is masks. Masks have multiple benefits, more than just the obvious virus protection. I mean, we all know about the health benefits, but they became more than just about health. For a time, they were even seen as a way to express ourselves, as fashion accessories, another way to show our personality. Do you remember all the designs, all the patterns? I remember people wearing masks and matching them to their outfits or supporting their favorite teams or bands. But they also make us less self-conscious about potential hygiene issues, like bad breath or stuff stuck in our teeth. I kind of miss that part now. And they work pretty well in keeping our face somewhat warm during the colder weather, which is a bonus if you live in the northern hemisphere and when wintertime gets really cold. Also, the new terminology that arose around mask wearing, like smize, which meant smiling with your eyes because people couldn't see your mouth. It became this new way of communicating. It was amazing how quickly we all adapted to talking with half of our faces covered. It made us pay attention more to those subtle things like eye contact and body language. But beyond that, I think masks also had a psychological effect. For some people, they provided a sense of anonymity or even a feeling of safety. And it makes you wonder how that impacted those social interactions. I remember feeling more aware of personal space, like my own personal space and other people's. Like those boundaries were clearer and more respected, maybe. And another bonus, that I and others I have spoken to, many had not been sick during the time we all had to wear masks. And that sense of personal space kind of ties into the next silver lining I want to point out, which is the importance of connection. This is the concept that I love, that we're all connected and need connection. COVID-19 has been a reminder that we're all cut from the same cloth, and we're all connected, more so than we ever realized. And it's a great reminder that there is more that connects us than separates us. So we also need to remember our compassion towards others. It might seem counterintuitive at the time because of all the social distancing, but those years really underscored how interconnected we all are. It was like a global reminder that even with all our differences, we're all in this together, as I said at the beginning. I think that really captures what that whole period was about. It was like the world was forced to pause and reflect. And in that pause, we rediscovered compassion, empathy, and supporting each other. Did you find yourself connecting with people in new ways or deepening relationships during that time? I definitely noticed my own interactions changing. There was more vulnerability, like people were willing to share their anxieties, their struggles. It was like all those walls that we usually have in social situations just crumbled a little bit, allowing for more genuine connection. Did you feel that too? Did you maybe feel a stronger sense of community? I felt it both with people that I knew and even with strangers. It was like we were all facing the same uncertainties, and that created a bond that went beyond our usual differences. And that leads right into the next silver lining, number 4 of 5, that I want to talk about, which is nature as a constant. I've always loved getting outdoors with my dog, but more than ever, getting outside during the pandemic had been a balm for my sanity, a place where I could take a deeper breath, where it seems like the world is like what it was before. Nature has remained unchanged throughout all of this. Well, except for the fact that the planet actually healed itself in the initial few months of the pandemic. And that to me is a comfort. When everything felt so unpredictable, nature remained this steady source of comfort. I remember in those early months of the pandemic, there were all those reports of the planet healing itself a little bit. Less pollution, wildlife coming back to the cities. It was really amazing. It really was like the planet was taking a deep breath. A reminder that even with all the human chaos, the natural world just kept going. I definitely felt drawn to nature more than ever before, taking long walks with my husband and dog and paying attention to the changing seasons. It was really grounding, almost meditative, and I know a lot of people felt that way too. Now let's shift gears to the last silver lining, which is virtual connections, like Zoom get-togethers and other online events. During the height of the pandemic, I attended more online meditation retreats and mindfulness courses than I ever thought possible, and even came down with a mild case of what psychologists and other people called Zoom fatigue. But the big silver lining was connecting with an aunt who had terminal cancer, who I actually spent more time with via online visits than I have at any other in-person visit, like those big Easter and Christmas family get-togethers over the years. We actually spent real quality time, and for that I am grateful, and I cherish every virtual moment that we had before she passed away. It shows how technology, even with its limitations, can help us connect deeply, especially when we're physically separated. And before I go further into this final silver lining, I just want to ask, what are some silver linings that you recognized since the new normal of the pandemic began in 2020, so over the past 5 years? I have to be honest that this one felt a little bit of a strange silver lining because of all the emphasis on social distancing, which seemed negative. So why wouldn't virtual interactions be negative too? We always think of virtual connections as like the second-rate version of the real thing. But virtual connections have their own advantages, especially when you can't be there in person. That's what I found so fascinating. It makes you rethink what a meaningful connection really is. Did you experience anything that changed your view on virtual connections? I think those initial pandemic years really showed us what virtual connections could do. Remember how online platforms became this lifeline for staying in touch, for hobbies, even for attending events? They'd open up this whole new world. I remember watching virtual plays, joining online book clubs, and yoga and meditation classes. There was even virtual cooking classes. Anything you could think of, you could do virtually, all from the comfort of home. It was amazing how quickly we adapted, and it makes you wonder if those virtual connections, which started out of necessity, maybe they've changed things for good, like for accessibility and inclusivity. I think it definitely challenged our assumptions about what's possible. But as we talk about these silver linings, it's important to remember that not everyone's experience was positive. Some people loved working remotely, but others really struggled with the isolation and the lines getting blurred between work and home. Virtual connections were great for some, but they also highlighted the digital divide. Inequality is in access to technology and the internet. So how do we reconcile that with this idea of finding silver lining? I've gone through a lot of positives during the pandemic, but we need to acknowledge that those silver linings weren't universal. It reminds us that even in a shared global event, everyone's experience is shaped by their own situation and privileges. And moving forward, it's crucial to make sure that everyone benefits from the opportunities that emerged, not just those with resources. It's about recognizing those systemic factors that contribute to those disparities and working towards a more equitable and inclusive future. But even with those caveats, I think there's a lot to be gained from reflecting on those silver linings. It's about finding those moments of hope, those lessons learned, and taking them with us as we face new challenges in the coming years, and finding what resonates most with you. For me, looking at these positive aspects, the biggest takeaway is the power of perspective. It's a reminder that we can choose to focus on the positive even when things are tough. It's not about ignoring the challenges, but about finding those sparks of light, those unexpected gifts. It's about choosing to focus on the possibilities, on what we've learned, and on the beauty that can come from even the toughest times. And I think that's something we can all carry with us. But now I'm really curious to hear about your own personal silver linings from those years. What stands out when you look back? I think for me, the biggest thing was a deeper understanding of how interconnected everything is. The pandemic really highlighted how much we rely on each other, both locally and globally. Supply chains, travel restrictions, the way information spread. It was like a wake-up call to what happens in one part of the world affects everyone else. It's like we were all forced to see the bigger picture. And the realization made me want to be more responsible and more mindful of my impact on the world, both in my personal choices and in my role in larger systems. It was like the pandemic peeled back a layer, showing this web of life in a way that I'd never seen before. It speaks to the power of shared experiences to change our views. But again, before I continue to get too philosophical, I'm curious about some more personal silver linings that you might have discovered. Does anything specific come to mind for you? On a personal level, I found myself enjoying those simple things again, like taking walks in nature every day and really noticing the sights and sounds, and things I used to miss, and rediscovering the beauty all around me, finding peace in the middle of all the craziness. Before 2020, my life was just go, go, go. Work and social events were just non-stop. But then everything stopped and I had all this time. Like the world just pressed pause. Did you experience anything like that, going from crazy busy to kind of slowing down a lot? Maybe one of your biggest silver linings could be rediscovering your creativity. Did you maybe have a creative reawakening? Maybe you were finally allowed to explore those creative things that you always wanted to do but put off, like hobbies. Maybe playing music, maybe journal writing, maybe gardening. The slowing down during the pandemic reminded me of the things that brought me joy outside of my normal routine. It's like those tough times forced us to step back and really see what mattered. It's fascinating how these unexpected breaks can lead to such big self-discovery. We were able to shed all that outside stuff and reconnect with ourselves. It makes me think about what I've been talking about in this podcast. It's not just about those specific years. It's about realizing that when things are hard, there's always room for growth, for change, even for joy, and finding a dose of wonder. It's about finding those silver linings, those unexpected good things that come out of tough times. And it reminds me of that quote, that the wound is the place where the light enters you. It speaks to how resilient we are as humans. We are aware that even in our darkest times, there's always hope and a little bit of light waiting for us. And sometimes it takes those hard experiences, those moments when our lives get turned upside down, to help us see that light. It's like we need those contrasts, those dark moments, in order to really appreciate the light. So as I end this week's podcast, I hope you're inspired to find your own silver linings from those years. Take some time to reflect, embrace those lessons, and remember, even when it's dark, there's always light to be found. On next week's podcast, I'll be talking about whether it's possible to love one's fate, which is a Stoic philosophy called amor fati. Until then, don't forget to live with a dose of wonder.